Hey guys, it's Hunter. Welcome back to another video. So a few months ago, I got this Savage 120 Mark II amp from ENGL, and I've been using it a lot because I love it. The tones are incredible, easily one of the best sounding amps I've had the pleasure of trying. It's also one of the most frustrating amps I've ever used. Let me explain. Let's take a closer look. So the first thing you should know about this amp is that it is very hard to make it sound bad. Even everything at noon, all the settings set to default, it sounds great, and then you can kind of go from there. And by the way, when I say it sounds great, I mean on every channel. Obviously, ENGL, known for metal. The name Savage, you might not think of this as anything but a fire-breathing monster of an amp. And it definitely does that. The tone is monstrous. But the clean and both crunch channels are also really great. And it's funny, that's not really something I was even thinking about before the amp got here. I was just excited to try that legendary ENGL high gain tone. Anyways, the fact that this sounds awesome out of the box is great for people like myself who just want to plug in and get to work. But then you've got all the additional inclusions. The Savage is like an amp nerd's wet dream. The front panel looks like something out of the Apollo space missions. It has one of the most extensive customization packages out there to really sculpt your tone. Some would call this overkill, a disaster in option paralysis. Glass half full, I'd call this the ability to really craft your own signature tone. That being said, my personal experience was that even after using it for months, understanding the front panel was a task and a half. So I did film the unboxing. It's very simple, not a lot of case goodies with it. No foot switch or anything, you basically just get the amp, the power cable, and the manual. What I really like about the manual is that it's lined with tips from the actual designer. That's really cool, but the way the tips are written, it's mostly for the hardcore amp guys, which, in fairness, I guess they assume you are if you drop this amount of money on an amp. It's got a healthy tube complement, 6 12 AX7 preamp tubes, and then 2 beefy ass 6550s in the power section. Now this is the first time I've used an amp with 6550s, and holy shit, You know, usually if you're talking 100 watts, 120 watts, you're talking 4 6L6s or EL34s. This only has 2 power tubes and it's pushing 120 watts of power. Now when I first plugged this in, one of them had gotten knocked loose during shipping. I didn't know that though. I didn't know what it was supposed to sound like, but it was only running 1 tube and it still sounded good. Eventually noticed one of them wasn't lighting up though, reseated it, and holy shit, the fullness and the thickness just hit. So I don't know if it's the tubes or the way the ENGLs voice this thing, or both, but now I kind of want to throw 6550s into everything. So let's dive into the features. You've got 4 channels, each with its own volume and gain settings. Clean and Crunch 1 channels have shared EQ controls. Same thing with the Crunch 2 and Lead channels. You also have dual presence and master, which can be individually set and switched on the fly, and dual effects loops. There's a built-in noise gate, which I absolutely love and think should be standard on any modern high-gain amp. Very, very useful, and it's a good one too. It's transparent and responsive. Can't stand preamp hiss, so I'm a big fan. Then there are a ton of pushable switches on the front panel. Input low-high, gain low-high, bright, pre-shape, contour, mid-lean, bold, noise gate, depth boost, rough, smooth. On the surface, it's not the easiest amp to immediately fully realize all the possibilities of. There's so much here, and it's not immediately clear how everything works or what it does. Luckily, your options can be saved since the amp is MIDI controllable. Unfortunately, I don't have a MIDI controller that works with it, and I don't have the ENGL foot switch either, but just know that that's something that the amp is capable of. Now, since I still don't fully understand the details of what this thing can really do, I thought it'd be fun to run through the settings and see if we can figure out this absolute monster together. Okay, so the input low-high switch is pretty self-explanatory. It's a volume boost. What's interesting about it is that it works differently depending on the channel you're on. Clean and Crunch 1 get a 10 decibel boost, while Crunch 2 and Lead get a 4 dB boost. And I kind of really like it the most as a pushed clean tone. Bright switch, this is great. It basically just boosts the top end and it works for all the channels. I love super bright clean, so on that channel I am all about this button. Pre-shape button is where things start to get a little less clear on paper. It's essentially a targeted mid-cut. The contour switch also affects the mids, but in like kind of the opposite way. It boosts mids apparently in the 300 to 700 kilohertz range, and to a lesser extent in the 1.5 kilohertz to 3 kilohertz range. Onto this mid-lean bold switch. This is where things get really interesting. You might have noticed the EQ section for Clean Crunch 1 has 2 separate mid-control knobs, mid-lean and mid-bold. These control the mid-range in different ways. Mid-lean is aggressive across the mid-range spectrum. You can really nuke those mids and get a super scoop tone. I prefer mid-bold though, since you seem to keep a lot more of those lower mids especially. The two don't work simultaneously. You pick one or the other, and that's what that switch does. Moving on to the controls for the Crunch 2 and Lead channels, there's a contour switch here as well. Does the same thing, you can just set it independently to the contour option for the other 2 channels. Gain low-high acts acts as another boost you can kick on for leads or solos. It's the button you press when you want everyone in the audience and the rest of your band to know who's the boss around these parts. Now the rough smooth is another interesting one. This completely changes the overdrive characteristics of the Crunch 2 and lead channels. Rough is the default mode. You use the bass, mid, and treble controls as normal. It seems to be more scooped. For heavy riffing, this is the mode I prefer on the lead channel. Once you activate smooth mode though, it's more mid-heavy. You get access to the tone balance knob. I really like this line from the manual. A certain lower mid-frequency range is emphasized if the knob is turned counterclockwise. If turned clockwise, an additional portion of treble is added to the sonic scenario. Sonic scenario, amazing. And it sounds more vintagey. I like it on Crunch 2 a lot. And lastly, the depth boost. This boosts the low end by 6 dB. It works for all the channels, but I am all about it for the lead channel. Something about a nice, pronounced bottom end, lol, even though it pretty much all gets cut in a mix, it's just a lot of fun to play with, lol. The Savage has more than enough low end already, but I still love that it's here. The sheer thickness you can get out of this amp is inspiring, gets me in a good mood, and when you're in a good mood, you write better riffs, so I'm all about this. Okay, so just a couple of final thoughts. I mean, it goes without saying, this amp is an absolute monster. 120 watts, built in Germany, a name like Savage, you already knew it was gonna be good, but this good? I mean, even by big amp standards, this thing has a stupid amount of low end. And unlike a Mesa Rectifier, for example, it's not totally out of control. You don't need to run an overdrive in front of it. It's still got that modern, tight feel and response. Is it the circuitry? Is it the absolutely massive tubes? Was it born with it? I don't know, but whatever Engle's done here, it's worked. And as I said, this is the first Engle that I've owned, so the first one I've spent a significant amount of time with. Their US distribution struggled for a while. It was really hard to find them here last couple of years, and they were expensive. Now they're being distributed in the US by ESP. That's great. So they're still expensive, at least this one, but at least now they're easier to find. I'm still not really familiar how it differs from the rest of the Engle line, from the Fireball, the Powerball, the Iron Ball, the Invader. I respect Engle's style. They're just like, hey, what flavor of kick-ass are you in the mood for? So I have no idea how it compares, but I love this one. It's not cheap, but it sounds incredible. I have so much fun playing this thing. It's a different sound to my other high gain amps. It's dark and compressed and angry. It's like the emo child of amps. The Savage basically requires a PhD to get the most out of it, and Engle knows it too. Just look at the manual and how many notes are in there. The amp is so good, it's easy to get some amazing tones in minutes, and then there's a massively steep learning curve. But if you can master it, the sheer level of tone customization and versatility you can get out of it is incredible. I think it's pretty funny. Between pre-shape, contour, mid-lean, mid-bold, rough, and smooth modes, you're getting so much precise control over the mid-range especially. It can be pretty intimidating at first. Meanwhile, you've got other companies who are literally just giving you the one tone-shaping knob. Is this the better solution? depends who you are. It's the Apple Android argument, but in amp form. Clearly, there's a lot more individual customization available here, if you're into that kind of thing. My only real complaint with the Savage is that by itself, without a compatible MIDI controller, you are losing a lot of valuable functionality. For example, even without a MIDI controller on the Rev Generator 120 Mark III, you can save your favorite settings on the amp to each channel, and it'll automatically recall them the next time you select that channel using just the front panel. There doesn't seem to be a clear way to do that on the Savage Mark II. I've only figured out how to save one preset on the amp that will automatically populate when I turn the amp on. Right now that's the lead channel with the contour and depth boost on, but when I switch over to the clean channel, it keeps those settings. It doesn't automatically deactivate the depth boost and activate the bright switch. I have to do that manually every time. So if you've got a MIDI controller, that opens up a whole new world for this amp. Like, I would have loved the ability to save settings for each channel, so when I go from the lead channel to Crunch 2, it would automatically know to switch from rough to smooth at the same time. But yeah, overall, with a name like Savage, there was a lot for this amp to live up to, and even still, I am blown away by how good this thing is and how different it feels to other high gain amps. Absolute monster and a ton of fun. Oh, and one last thing, I've had a couple people ask if, because of my last name, whether I'm related to someone at the company. No, that would be awesome, but it did help get the conversation started. So if you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and hit the like button. These, of course, just my opinions. I love this amp, but I'd love to hear what you think more, so leave them in the comments. A weird sentence. Massive, massive thanks to ENGL for gifting this glorious Savage for us to check out together. I am honestly still speechless that even happened. What were they thinking? Social media, merch, and Discord server links are in the description. As always, thank you so much for watching. You have been awesome, and I'll see you for the next video, which will be the Dean Cadillac, I think. See you around.